back to my channel. My name is Jenny. I'm here today to share a book review, and I promised this book review in my November wrap-up, and it is Seven Fallen Feathers, Racism, Death, and Hard Truths in a Northern City by Tanya Talaga. This was one of the most important books I read in 2019, and I think that there's a lot of reasons why this book was as good as it was. I gave it 5 stars. One of the reasons is because Tanya Talaga's writing style is extremely accessible. She writes in a way that immediately makes you feel comfortable with the people that she's talking about. And I think in nonfiction, that is a really great quality, because it's hard to connect a lot of the time with real people in nonfiction. They become names, numbers, facts instead of actual real people, living, breathing people. And there's a lot of different people that are talked about in this story, in this narrative, and she does it in a very, very effective way. This book is about 7 Indigenous youth who died under somewhat suspicious and negligible circumstances in the 2000s in Thunder Bay, Ontario, which is a northern city. So a lot of the youth who were living in Thunder Bay were not from Thunder Bay. They were from very remote, small reserves in other parts of northern Ontario that were very far away, and they were young. They were 14 to 17 years old. That was the first time that they were away from their families, first time they were in a city, first time they were in a place that had stoplights and sidewalks and access to typical things, fast food and malls and liquor stores, things like that. There is a problem with education in Canada regarding Indigenous people, and that is because our structure is set up so that education is funded from money from the federal government goes into the provincial governments, and then the provincial governments are the ones that distribute the money. And they do not distribute that money evenly to Indigenous people. They give it mostly to white settler people living in cities and in towns and in the more populated areas. And so the structure that was set up after colonization to manage First Nations peoples was not done in a way that has created a thriving education system for Indigenous youth and children. In fact, it has done the opposite. And we have residential schools, which is also mentioned in here, to contribute to the dysfunction of the general educational system for Indigenous peoples in Canada. And so this book details how the Indian Act, which is the legislative governance of the Indigenous peoples of Canada, how that affects education, how it has created horrible results through colonization, through removing Indigenous youth from their families, through taking away their culture, through abuse of every possible kind, and has resulted in youth who are being underserved and who are being neglected through the system. All of this is explained extremely well in this book. All of this is detailed in a way that makes you enraged, but also makes you understand it very, in my opinion, very clearly. What I was most shocked about when reading this book was how racism is so ingrained in the culture of Thunder Bay. not only in the police department, but also in the general population, how these First Nations youth are having horrible racist acts committed against them as they're walking down the street, let alone being beaten or abused in a way that has resulted in their deaths, as was the case for these 7 students, but has happened with many other students as well. I did read a very brief article where Tanya Talaga mentions that since she wrote this book, there has been a little bit of work done in Thunder Bay to try to mitigate the problems. One of those things was a library center that has opened up and is trying to serve Indigenous youth. And she was so happy that that is happening for some youth, but it is so behind and the services are so behind that to catch up at this stage will be an uphill battle for sure, to say the least. I was so inspired by the cover, which is actually based on a painting by Christian Morisseau, who is the son of another very famous Indigenous Canadian painter. And there's a lot of beauty in this story as well, because Tanya Talaga, I think, is just a really talented writer, and she's able to share beautiful, positive things that people were doing to try to help this situation, and shared so many different people's stories and how they are continuing to believe that they can improve these situations despite how dire it has become and continues to be for these youth. So if you are interested in learning about what the real repercussions of white settler culture are in countries such as Canada, Australia, and the United States, I would say this is all very indicative of all of those of all these nations, because we all have inflicted horrible atrocities onto Indigenous peoples. And I would say residential schools, I think, are quite uniquely Canadian. And so they are one aspect of Canadian culture that is uniquely our own, unfortunately, and has created a horrible repercussion that has had generational reverberations. I would encourage you to read this book. I do think I had a comment in my November wrap up that said that every Canadian should read this book, and I deeply agree with that. There is going to be no way that we can move forward as a community and really empathize and acknowledge the damage done unless we acknowledge truths such as are represented in Seven Fallen Feathers. And I'm deeply grateful that this book came onto my radar, and I am so glad that I read it in Nonfiction November. If you have any questions about this book, or are curious as to, anything more about it, I'd happy to talk about it with you in the comments. And there are so many important books that are being written right now that are speaking about the truths of Indigenous peoples in Canada. This is just one of them, but I would say that this one has won awards, and there's reasons for that. And I would definitely encourage you to read it and to absorb that and to take the lessons in here very, very seriously. And hopefully, when we all start acknowledging the reality of Indigenous people in this country, we can actually start to affect change and create a community of everyone living side by side where there is true equality. So thank you so much for watching, and I will be back again soon with another video.